We get together here on Sunday evenings to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We are just all sort of divided up into different jurisdictions, and we live in different regions, and we don't really get to know each other very well. I find that we'll know the people who are in our specific jurisdiction, maybe, right? Like you might know the people at your Greek church or your Antiochian church, but do you know the people at the Russian church down the road, right? Like we don't know each other often enough. And so I think it's kind of a nice little project here. We're getting to know different Orthodox people from all around the country, sometimes out of the country too, and just living out Orthodoxy in different ways and thinking about all the different ways that Orthodoxy impacts our lives. So here we go. This is sort of like coffee hour. So we're just going to sit back and chat and have a nice conversation. The show streams live on YouTube if you want to see our smiling faces. It's also on ancientfaith.com. It is on the AFR app. It is at AFM's Facebook Live. You can see us stream live. And of course, we always archive the episodes. So if you miss a live episode, you can always come back later and see it on the podcast page, both on the app or the website or on YouTube. All right, we got all of that covered. Now, welcome. I have a great guest for you tonight. I'm very excited. His name is Father Alexander Earl, and he's the assistant priest at St. John of the Ladder in Greenville, South Carolina. He's a senior fellow of philosophy and theology at the Pacifica Center for Philosophy and Theology, far away from Greenville, South Carolina, in Santa Monica, California. And he formerly was the director and developer of curricula there. He's also a contributor to the forthcoming book, Into the Light, Classical Education and Orthodox Christianity. So I know a lot of you out there are very interested in classical education. And so I have a feeling you're going to enjoy getting to know Father Alexander. But Father Alexander, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy.
Oh, it's just great. I'm glad that you're able to make it. This is going to be fun. So I just want to ask right off the bat, you're in South Carolina. How's it going? I know there was the Hurricane Helene was pretty awful over there. How are you guys doing? How's everything?
We are wonderful, thank God. We certainly had some parishioners who had some property damage. We're stuck, stuff like this. But glory to God, the temple is unharmed. Our property was unharmed. And big swaths of Greenville are still in pretty good shape. Of course, that can't be said for just north of us. And so we've been trying to lead some efforts with parishioners to aid in the cleanup and assistance of our neighbors to the north, who sadly, there's just devastation, as you're aware. But otherwise, glory to God, everything's good.
Thank God. Yeah, it's always crazy to see how, one area looks just fine a couple days later, and then just right next door is just crazy devastation. And so, but thank God for that, because that means that there's somebody available to help when there's a problem. So I guess that's a blessing in the end.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, so Father, tell me, where were you born? Where does your story start?
Well, speaking of hurricanes, I suppose I was born in Orlando, Florida. Grew up in Central Florida, and so very used to hurricanes. They're not of this magnitude. So I was born in Florida, born in Orlando, and I didn't leave Orlando until I was out of college, actually. So I was a native Floridian for a very long time before I moved.
Is that somewhat rare in Florida? Like, I think of Florida as a place that people move to, especially for retirement and stuff, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Are there a lot of native Floridians there? Because I know in Austin, Texas, when we meet a native, we're like, wow, everybody gathers around and we kind of look at them. We're like, really, your whole life?
Yes. By the way, that's how I feel in Greenville. So I would say that the native, I don't know what you want to call it, Orlandoer or whatever, is rarer. Certainly, you don't find it. There's just a lot of transplants and, of course, tourists and all this stuff. But I'm shocked in Greenville, for example. It's like every other person I meet, it's like, well, where are you from? And they're like, oh, Greenville. And I was like, what? Like, you've been here this whole time? And sometimes it's like generations of people. So at any rate, for Orlando, I would say no. And it's probably even worse now. It's, becoming one of the largest cities. So at any rate, no.
Yeah. Well, and Orlando's kind of in that sweet spot. Like you mentioned hurricanes, right? But it seems like the hurricanes really hit the coast, right? And Orlando's right in the center. So you get them, but it seems like the damage is generally sort of
That's right.
mitigated. It's just a really bad storm by the time it hits
Mhm.
Orlando, usually. And I mean,
Yeah, when we were
Orlando,
young,
but
you would go out into, like, it was part of the experience to go out into the storm and even stand when the eye was over the city. You would go out and look up and see this gigantic storm. Very unlikely you would do that if you lived in, say, Tampa or Miami.
yeah,
But even with just the hurricane, was it Milton? You know, that was expected to be one of the worst hurricanes in my lifetime for Central Florida. It ended up not being so, I don't believe. But again, on the coast, it's a disaster. I mean, it's people are evacuating, they're hunkering down, they're sandbags. I mean, it's a different experience. So it's kind of odd because in Orlando, a hurricane's kind of exciting. It's like it's
right.
going to pull some trees down maybe, but it doesn't really do very much damage typically to Central Florida. At least in my experience, it hasn't. And you have hurricane parties and go out into the storm and look up at, it's crazy.
Yeah, I have a friend in Orlando, and it's always like the big question is, will we have internet tomorrow? Like, will
Yes,
the
that's
electricity go
exactly,
out? Will
that's
the air
exactly
conditioner
it.
be
Yeah,
working? And but again,
yeah,
thank God, because that means that there's a place for people to go
that's right.
when the
That's
hurricanes
right.
are coming. But so tell me, growing up as a kid, then were you the thing that strikes me about Florida? Because I grew up in California. Really, all I thought about were
Mm,
beaches in Florida, right? I just assumed it was all beaches and Disneyland. And then when I started going there to visit, I realized like there's crazy wildlife in Florida. I mean, there
yeah.
are, we're walking in neighborhoods in Orlando and seeing like sea otters in little lakes, and there's
Yes.
crazy stuff there. So as a
Yeah.
young boy there, were you kind of fascinated with the wildlife, or did you just kind of take it for granted and it was just part of the scenery?
No, fascinated it would be an understatement.
Yeah.
I loved, reptiles, lizards, snakes, and would catch them often mischievously. So, there's a story that my mother often tells where it's like, who knows how big I was, 5, 6, maybe even less than that. And I was trying to catch this lizard, and he was inside of our patio area. Well, he wasn't playing ball, and so I went and got this wooden spoon, and I was like, I'm gonna hit the lizard down. Like I was chasing this lizard with this spoon. Trying now, I'm like young. I don't think I'm gonna hurt him. It's like, no, you have to, like, you belong to me.
Right.
And
Right.
my mother, of course, had to save that poor lizard. But I used to love doing that. You'd keep them. You take care of them for a little while. I grew up with an iguana, like a bearded dragon. I owned snakes. You would find gators in your backyard from time to time. I mean, it's wild, and it sticks with you because even now I'm in South Carolina. Like, I've lived in Connecticut and New York and Los Angeles. You don't see as much wildlife, to your point. And so now that I'm in South Carolina, you see more of it, not as much as Central Florida, I don't think, at any rate. And so, like, I love catching them for, like, my children now. So a little bit of the youth has come back, in the sense of
Right.
my love. I don't think I was catching lizards when I was in my 20s in college, but now the zeal has returned. I'm just hopefully not hitting them with, like, wooden spoons or something.
No, I mean, it really is truly amazing, and the sheer number of wild animals. And so this friend of mine, Whitney is her name. She lived in Austin all of her life. She's going to Orlando, and they're like, "Careful, there's bears in Orlando." And we're like, "There are bears in Orlando. What are you talking about? Bears? They have iguanas. They don't have bears." No, there are bears. There's all sorts of stuff.
They're somewhere for
I
sure.
like
I
at
admittedly have
least
not seen a bear. I mean, but
no,
I've
I
seen everything else. No.
she gets bears in her yard in Longwood all the time. All
Oh,
the time.
she's in
It's a
Longwood
crazy
getting
place.
bears. That's nuts.
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
telling you, Orlando, it's a very unpredictable place. But so
yeah.
as a kid, so you're checking out the reptiles, you're running around.
Mhm.
And then what else did you enjoy doing as a kid? What kind of a kid were you?
I did all kinds of things, I suppose. I played soccer. My father was a really good soccer player, and so I played soccer for a little while. I loved, yeah, I mean, as I said, reptiles, dinosaurs, that sort of. I mean, it's classic, right?
Yes.
Believe it or not, I danced for a very long time,
Huh?
almost professionally. So it certainly doesn't look like it these days, but at one
What kind
point
of
I was
dance?
pretty good. I did all kinds of things. So I guess at one point I was doing ballet, jazz, and then in the early 2000s, like hip hop was the thing.
Oh, wow.
But even then, it was still like, Michael Jackson or something was still the primo. At any rate, so I did that for a very long time, and then sort of grew out of it, as in terms of a pursuit. Like when I was really young, I thought I might be a professional dancer. So it's funny how things work out. But I probably stopped dancing like in terms of seriously by the time I was in high school.
Okay. So
It was just for
like
fun.
middle schoolish, were you like competitive dancing and doing all the
Yeah, we did all kinds. I choreographed a lot of stuff, and was on dance teams and did recitals, or like, we performed at what were those places called? Maybe it's called like Boxcar or something like this in Orlando, and then TD. I don't think we ever did TD Waterhouse, but next to TD Waterhouse is something I think called Boxcar. I'm not even sure if it's there anymore, but it was a performance theater.
that's
At any rate, so yeah, it's a wild part of the history.
and what a different life, to be a professional dancer versus being
Oh
an
yeah.
Orthodox priest. It's really, I feel like there are
Yeah,
some twists and turns. That's kind of
yeah, and I'm very happy. Obviously, it sort of turned out this way. I mean,
yes, of
so
course.
it's a would be a very different life, and maybe my experience is a very hard life.
Yeah.
So yeah, at any rate, I'm grateful.
That's really neat. That's very cool. Okay, so then you're in high school and you kind of feel like you're tired of dancing competitively. So
Mhm.
then what were you doing in high school? What were you thinking about and what was interesting to you then?
Yeah, this is it's fascinating. The simple way of putting it is I had a very Augustinian youth. I think a lot of people have this, but most certainly a lot of just general debauchery, frankly. I was not Christian. By that point, I had disavowed religion and was a sort of card carrying atheist, and was a Marxist. I was very into socialism. I mean, like some young people are into socialism because it's just like cute, apparently. But I was reading, Noam Chomsky and Marx
Yeah.
and Lenin, and there's just that kind of, even Schmemann sometimes picks up on this, that kind of revolutionary idealism, in youth, and that really, kept going until I was in my, towards the end of my high school career, moving into college. Believe it or not, it must have been my 18th or 19th birthday. Made a trip to Boston and like met with Noam Chomsky. I like sent him an email. It was just like, hey, I want to meet and talk about socialism. And but anyhow, then I converted to Christianity sort of unexpectedly, and then a lot of that began to change. So that high school pocket is really wild. At least as far as I could say.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so you're going through these high school years. So where did you decide to go to college and what were you going to study as a young Marxist revolutionary?
Where
What
does
was
a
the
Marxist
plan?
revolutionary study? You
Right? What
know,
do you
um,
do?
by the time I was done with high school, moving into college, I had squandered so much, and so I was not able to get in anywhere, frankly. And that was one of the wake up calls. That was sort of I had not students, teachers, that would pull me aside and say, look, what are you doing? Like, you clearly can do this, but you refuse to. And so I went to a place called Valencia College in Orlando for my AA, and that was where I sort of decided to try to pull my act together. And it was there that I had just kind of converted to Christianity and was still hanging on to the socialism stuff. I wasn't sure, at least at the time, I wasn't convinced that they were incompatible or something. And so, but I was introduced to the humanities there in a way I hadn't been before. And so, I mean, I started studying in college, just whatever. I was interested in things like political philosophy and this sort of thing. But when I was doing the humanities, I started to take philosophy classes. I took an ethics class, an intro philosophy class, a bunch of humanities stuff all over the place. It just started to, I mean, it was a big light bulb moment. There was this moment where I said, where has this been? In the sense of, you go through life and it seems, I mean, fairly trivial, frankly. Like, people don't talk about very much. Nothing's very interesting. A lot of it's very shallow, let's say. and even education in particular. It's like, what's the point of any of this? Like, why am I doing this? Why would I read Dante? Like, who cares? When you're 16, that's just your MO. But once you start doing it in college, and you really sort of awaken to, that, hey, for example, philosophy is a thing, and you introduce to those thinkers, those texts, it shows you a whole other way of seeing that you didn't have access to before. So I did the AA and then transferred to a place called Rollins College, which is a liberal arts school in Ware Park, Florida, and just continued to study basically religion and philosophy. And from there, it's just kind of a slow progression of starting to wrestle with things and think through things. And and then I guess that's what what does a Marxist revolutionary do? I guess he discovers philosophy and stops being a Marxist revolutionary, hopefully.
Right? Becomes a philosophy major.
Yeah, and just decides, that's useless. So,
yeah. Well, but I mean, it's an interesting thing to go through, right? You learn a lot in that process, I'm sure. But you just sort of threw in there like, I became Christian during that time. How? Like, so out of curiosity, so when you first started out, were you raised in any particular religious perspective, or like, how did all of that evolve that you went from like becoming really specifically an atheist and then becoming a Christian?
That's a good question. I think in most cases, like my home was like what we might call like vaguely culturally Christian. I went to an Episcopal academy as a child, which interestingly did have some kind of subconscious effect on me. Like I can remember going to the Episcopal academy and like going to the services, and like they had communion and stuff like this. But my household certainly was not religious. Like God and Christianity were not like a normal part of the rhythm. My mother did pray with me, like when I was young, like she would say the Lord's Prayer with me. So my mother always had a kind of religious tendency. But even that, I don't think really blossomed in the sense of like real committed Christianity until I was probably a teenager, and she started going back to church. And she was going to a Baptist church at the time, which I had no interest in. So I think as the atheist, I was automatically closed off to, frankly, just Protestantism. I just thought, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm not interested in the kind of warehouse, rock band thing. Particularly if you, I guess I should say, like, in high school, you're very much into like punk or hardcore or metal music or whatever. It's like, well, then whatever you're seeing over here at the warehouse is just, lame in comparison. Like if I want to go to a concert, I'll go to the good stuff. And so at any rate, I had no interest in that. By the time I was about 17-ish, this is going to sound really bizarre. And I think it's the humor of God. I remember I was trying to get into reading a little bit more, I should say. I wasn't doing much. And I read that crazy book, The Da Vinci Code. What? And for some reason, I had nothing, zero. And I think this will speak to probably what certainly I'm seeing as a priest with converts. It just opened up an interest in me. Like the Da Vinci Code, that book, of course, is wild, but it was full of mystery and power and all kinds of crazy shenanigans. And it just began to make you think, like, is there something I'm missing here? Like, and particularly, believe it or not, though, of course, we'd all look at that story and say, well, I mean, there's all kinds of heretical, crazy stuff there.
Right.
But for someone who has nothing, it opened up a new curiosity where I was like, what is this Christian stuff exactly? Like, is this true? Like, is this book telling me the truth? And then I began to look into it. I decided to read the Gospels, and then just slowly but surely I became transfixed by the figure of Christ. And I was just at that time of life where it felt enough things had coalesced to where I knew something needed to change. I was hungry for something, and Christianity just suddenly emerged as this thing I had never really considered before, and that I just found so morally profound. I ain't gotten to the metaphysics stuff yet, just so morally profound, so beautiful. And then I went to a couple Roman Catholic churches. That was like, so the irony, I read Da Vinci Code, like, I'm going to go check out the Roman Catholic Church. And even there, the Mass, like there was just something happening that was abnormal. It was like, well, people aren't doing this anywhere else. And so I converted Christianity, and then I was seeking for a home. And I actually, by total accident, this just goes to show how young people function, frankly. Like we think everything's so serious. Sometimes it's very haphazard. I went to a Catholic church and I was like, that was okay. I didn't feel very welcomed. And there was this other church across the street. It was very beautiful. It was like in this almost Gothic style. I was like, why are there two Catholic churches next to each other? It doesn't make any sense. And so I walked over there and like, oh, we're the Episcopal Church. I was like, well, what's that? And they're like, well, we're like the Catholic Church, but, like basically cooler. And I was like, great. And even there, the liturgy or the mass, whatever you want to call it, was like more reverent, like more beautiful. So I was like, sign me up. And so I started going to the Episcopal Church. And at any rate, so that's the kind of short. By the time I was 19, I was Episcopalian, and going to the Episcopal Church, pretty seriously.
I love that the Da Vinci Code was the thing that caught your imagination.
It's so bizarre.
It makes sense, right? Like, it does make sense to me but it's funny because at the time, we're all running around going like, this thing's garbage. Like, this is a terrible book. This is a disaster.
Yep.
Like, but at the same time, it is also true that as young people in America, we don't get a lot of glimpses of traditional Christianity and the history of Christianity, right? And so all of a sudden, here's this book that's saying the church has always been here. And even if it's saying, and they've done crazy things and they've
hidden the truth or whatever, you're like, well, that's an interesting institution.
Right? Like, there is a truth and you could get to the bottom of it. And it's like, this is that. I can absolutely see where that would, because I think one of the questions that an American Protestant or non-Christian American who only has really seen Protestantism is like, you have to first become aware of the idea that there was something before the Reformation, that there was something that ever happened. So I guess the Da Vinci Code could do it. That's amazing.
And I think that given everything that's happening now, which is really bizarre to me, in the sense of like the big thing when I converted was, of course, like new atheism, and which I quickly, I was never down that track. Like the Dawkins track. But now, of course, things are so different with all the language of re-enchantment and just the amount of people we have that are either spiritual but not religious. They're nuns, they're pagan, they're Wiccan, they're coming from all kinds of wild backgrounds. Was not my experience. But the weird thing, I suppose, is that it was, in the sense of the Da Vinci Code was likewise, I guess, just that like little spark of enchantment that I did not possess as just a sort of brute materialist. And even though it was false in all kinds of ways, it opened up that just the hunt for enchantment, let's say. Like, maybe the world is more interesting than we imagine. And to your point, I think 100%, like though it's trying to, depict at least the Roman Catholic Church as this like super secret, cabal or whatever, it nonetheless then goes, well, what's that about? And as I said, is it true? So it did kind of open up a desire for the truth, and along with a kind of desire for enchantment or the mystique of it. And so it just sort of, started the gears rolling.
That's neat. And it brought you to liturgical Christianity, which is amazing. Wow, that's beautiful. Okay, so then by then you're 19. So you're working on your associate's degree, and then you'll end up staying there in town to get the bachelor's degree. So what is the final degree that you ended up, was it a philosophy degree?
So the bachelor's degree was religion and philosophy. And then I went off to grad school. So, because it was like, what do you do with a religion and philosophy degree?
Right.
So,
well, that's crazy though, that you were an atheist in high school, and by the time you're like a junior in college, you're like, I'm going to get a religion degree now. Like, that's amazing. That's a huge shift.
Totally. And it's life-changing, I think, at that age, because, frankly, you just lose people, like your life changes so dramatically that you just realize very quickly if your relationships were built on other things, like they just sort of, they dissolve, and not any sort of animosity sort of way. It's just like suddenly the people you're talking to, or the things you're thinking about, the things you care about, the things you're pursuing, you start to look like a fanatic, in the sense of a religious, you're just interested in religion, which is just weird. And you're studying religion at college, like, that's weird. So yeah, it was a pretty seismic shift in my life. There's no doubt about it.
Amazing. So were you thinking, when you're picking a graduate school, are you thinking like Episcopal seminary, Or are you just thinking, So did you go to seminary?
Well, so I considered like the various seminaries. It was weird because I always kind of, liked the academic stuff. Like I wanted to do serious philosophy and theology and religion. And so, I looked around and frankly, I'd always had, as a lot of people do, like a dream of making it into one of the Ivy League schools.
Sure.
And so I was told, actually, I had a priest at the time who went to Yale. He went to Yale Divinity School, and I loved him. He was great, and he was solid. Funnily enough, so I was like, wait, like solid in terms of like you would think he might be crazy, but and so I was like, oh, you went to Yale, and he prepped me, or at least he tried to. He was like, look, Yale's going to be crazy. Like you're going to meet crazy people who believe crazy things, but it's going to challenge you. And there'll also be pockets of people who are just exceptional, exceptionally bright, et cetera, faithful. And so I applied to Yale and thought, well, I'll do the both and, like if I can go to a school that will give the kind of academic rigor and it doubles down as seminary, then great. The irony, of course, is I get there and the whole thing falls apart in the sense of even you can only be talked about it so much. You don't realize how wild it actually is. And so I got to Yale, and it really was very much, it felt like climbing a mountaintop and then going, this is it. Like, this is all there is to this. And, and it was exactly as he had told me. It was just really wild things were happening. I mean, frankly, when I was there, what we now know is the typical sort of woke, whatever, that was like bubbling up. And I remember being there and thinking, there's no way this leaves this institution. I mean, it was just so asinine of an experience that you thought this has to be insular. And so when I saw it creeping out of the institutions, it was quite terrifying. But at any rate, so I went there, and I very quickly actually switched. I was there as an MDiv. I switched to an MA because I did not like the MDiv courses, did not like the cohort I was with. And it began to push me in a very different direction. It was definitely this moment, like, I guess, like a lot of people had this experience in the 60s or something when they were Episcopalian. Like I was waking up to it at Yale, which was you have this, frankly, vision that you're given by like the Oxford movement about Catholicity and the branch theory of ecclesiology. And I was an Anglo-Catholic, and then you realize you sit in a room with people with whom you go, I have no clue how we're in the same church. Like we have nothing in common. Like you don't even believe in Jesus ultimately, let alone to get into liturgy or something like this. And so just by a number of those things, I decided I want to be with the eggheads at this point, and I'll take the MA and thank you, see you later. And at that point, I knew like I was on my way out of the Episcopal Church.
Wow.
But the good news is I met my wife there. So we met at moving day of Yale. She was there studying religion and literature. And so by the time we were done with Yale, we were engaged, we got married, and we left. So
you got what you needed, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that's exactly it. So glory to God. Wow. It all worked out in the end.
Thank God. Thank God. That's fantastic. Well, we're going to take a short break. We're going to be right back with Father Alexander. We'll be right back.
Child's Guide to Vespers by Ancient Faith Publishing is designed to help children follow along with the service of great Vespers and learn more about the Church and our faith. Small and easy to hold with enriching illustrations, the guide is divided into several color-coded sections on things like preparing for Vespers, vesperal hymnography, evening prayers at home, and more. This guide is written for children ages 2 to 10. The very young child will learn basic vocabulary and come to recognize the various milestones in Great Vespers. For the older child, the guide will include several longer prayers and quotes, information on iconography, fasting, prayer, and almsgiving, plus an extensive glossary filled with terms and vocabulary often heard throughout the liturgical year. Available now at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Father Alexander Earl. So we were just talking about Yale Divinity School. And, during those years, I was at Berkeley in the graduate school there. And it really was interesting that all of the gender theory and all of that stuff, because it was, just kind of like stuff that people were spouting off and kind of making up. And, it seemed like I used to regale people back home with stories of all the crazy things I heard at Berkeley. And it really
totally
is an amazing thing to see all of a sudden that's like science, but it wasn't based on science. It was like literary criticism. It was philosophers. Right. So it is wild, but I love that you met your wife there and
yes.
It's beautiful. So, okay. So, and then you were saying also that you became disillusioned with the Episcopal Church. And that does make sense. I think, for some of our listeners who may not know it, right, the Anglican Communion, there's not really a lot of doctrine that has to be held in common, right? I don't remember what the core is that you're supposed to believe, but it's like there's a lot of tolerance for a lot of difference within that group, right? That it's...
Yeah. And the problem is exactly that. Like, what is the core? I mean, that's been lost in itself. One might say like the 38 Articles or something, but even that was up. I mean, everything was up for grabs. And I remember someone saying to me once something very simple just about the Elizabethan settlement, which was sort of, okay, you Catholics and Protestants have to play nice. Like, we can be in one church, but have these disagreements. And I just thought, no. I mean, these are incompatible views. And so at any rate, I think there's just a kind of historical trajectory that's led to this, in the sense of the dissolve of exactly what you're talking about. Like, what is even the basics? I don't think there's agreement on that. And that's pretty clear for all kinds of reasons. But I mean, that was a really rude awakening. If you really were serious about Jesus, and even by then I was totally convinced by things like apostolic succession and what have you. I mean, those things, like, as a good Anglo-Catholic, there were tons of things I believed. And then you just realize again that you basically are making it up, in the sense of there's nothing, like, I'm choosing this like I'm choosing at a buffet, and there's nothing else that determines that the people around me or even I have to believe these things. But there were certain things even then, like at Yale, I'm grateful I studied patristics, and that began to awaken a new world for me. I had done more like medieval and Latin theology. But then you start to do the Greek fathers, and things just start to click in new ways. So leaving Yale, I knew a sort of set things. I was like, okay, a few things are pretty clear from the ancient church. Like, I'm not totally deluded, hopefully. And so it really just became a question. I thought I'd just become Roman Catholic. I mean, that just seems the obvious thing for any Episcopalian to do. But anyway, it didn't really go that way. So
at that point, I mean, when you're at Yale Divinity, you heard about orthodoxy, right? Like, did it just seem like something that would be not an option today for like a guy from Orlando?
Yeah. I actually had went to an Orthodox church back when I was in college. 2 different Orthodox churches. I went to a Greek church. I went to an OCA church. And I mean, all I could say is I just must have not really been ready. It definitely, like, I remember at that time, this is like 2010, it doesn't feel like there was a lot around. I could look at the OCA website, which funny enough looks exactly the same as it did then. And, went to a couple of churches. And it definitely didn't feel like it was for me. It felt pretty foreign. It felt like a lot. And again, I was a fairly new just Christian. And so I was navigating some basic things back then. Like, even there, I was kind of interested in Orthodoxy. This is another funny thing, I'd read like N.T. Wright's book, Surprised by Hope, that really sort of challenged a number of sort of, cultural myths or normal thoughts on eschatology. And then within that it was N.T. Wright who had mentioned something about the Orthodox Church and that they really still held to this. And I was like, oh, go check those guys out. But it did feel like it didn't quite click at the time. And so I stayed Episcopalian. And then similarly, when we left Yale, it was something I knew existed, but it certainly didn't feel like, I didn't think as a live option, like, oh, I'll go become Orthodox now. I mean, certainly not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is interesting because, and I say it sometimes on this show, because I'll interview people who are like, and then I walked into an Orthodox church and I was just like, it's heaven. This is amazing. And their whole lives are changed. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's not how it was for me.
No.
I was not ready yet. And
Yep.
it really is, in God's time, we understand these things and we're ready for them and we receive them so differently. But yeah, similarly, I walked into an Orthodox church before I was ready for it. And it didn't strike me as anything that I would want to do, like,
Yeah.
I can argue with somebody else, but I thought they were probably wasting their time in there. But how interesting. Okay, so where did you go from Yale? What did you guys do? You've got your wonderful theology degrees. So
That's right.
obviously the world is your oyster. There are jobs everywhere for you.
Everywhere. I mean, I could have been doing what Musk is doing if I wanted to. We were newly married, as it were, and we there was a what do you call that, like a headhunter, like a firm that headhunts, and we basically said because the jobs were so plentiful, we said whoever gets the job first, we'll just go where that is. And to my wife's credit, she got hired. And got hired at this small liberal arts school in Santa Monica, California, to teach Latin and English. And so we went to Santa Monica, California. And so we're just as a little brief moment of this, we're newly married, so that means we're poor. We just left grad school. We drive across the country to live in Los Angeles. We can't, I mean, it's expensive, as anyone knows. So our first place living together is in this little studio apartment in Koreatown. We had purchased a truck to help us move our stuff, and that truck just never showed up, and or it was super late. So our first night in our little studio apartment, we had to go to Target to get a blow up bed. So we're in this blow up bed in the studio apartment, and then we hear some and we turn the lights on and there's roaches everywhere. And we're just this is it. We're doomed. At any rate, the first month in Los Angeles was challenging. Our stuff finally arrived. But so my wife had gotten the job at Pacifica. And about 6 months later, they just suddenly had their theology teacher leaving, who was their big church history teacher. And so I just threw my hat in the ring and they hired me. And so suddenly we were both teaching at Pacifica, which was glorious.
Oh, that's fantastic. What good luck. That is just lining up beautifully. All right. So you're teaching at Pacifica, but you're kind of tired of the Episcopal Church. So where were you guys going to church? Were you going to church, or
we were church hunting?
Churches? What were you doing?
Yeah, we were just church hopping. We did try an Episcopal church when we first got there, not knowing what to do, and so we did that as the temporary base, and then we just went around, and when we went around, we started looking at Roman Catholic churches, and I won't say too much about that experience, but it was lackluster. And I mean, I tried everything. It felt like everything. I went to Latin masses, I did the whole thing. And eventually, perhaps it's in a moment of desperation where it was surely this can't be it, And I guess all I can say is, I was reading a little bit, but I have to say it was a liturgical crisis, I think. And I know that maybe some people won't find that very convincing because some of the intellectual stuff came later, but I wasn't initially thinking about papacy or filioque or whatever. It was just simply a crisis of how is it possible that if the Roman Catholic Church is true, that I cannot find a church that seems to really care about liturgy. Or again, the only thing you can find is this Latin Mass, it's this 2-hour plus affair in a language you don't know and just feels very stifling. But I gave that a real shot. And by the way, I say that I loved the Latin Mass even then. I used to go to some Latin Masses as an Anglican, but just thinking that that's the only thing that you could do. At any rate, I decided, well, you know what? There was this thing called the Orthodox Church that I had tried once. Maybe we'll just try it again. And so my wife and I decided to go to an Orthodox church. And then to the point you made earlier, it did click. Like the first divine liturgy we went to, I remember we looked at each other and thought, I think this is it. And that's when I started to dive deeper and start reading more about like orthodoxy, like picking up Orthodox books and reading about Orthodox theology and be like, is it okay? Come on, like, let's see what's going on here. Reading about the Orthodox Catholic stuff. And just everything I read, I just became more and more convinced. And then we went to several Orthodox churches and just kept experiencing the same thing. And it's just like, this is incredible. Like, this is what I wanted as an Episcopalian. Like, just, you're telling me there's this church where they all believe the same thing. And it's like, it's universal in its practice. And it has such a rich theology that's rooted in the fathers. These same guys I read while I was at Yale, it's like alive. I can go to this priest or that priest or whatever, and he gives me the same answer. It was mind-blowing. And very quickly we decided we're going to become Orthodox.
Wow. So in what church did you end up converting? Like, which one became home for you guys?
Home became Holy Virgin Mary Cathedral in Los Angeles. It was funny. I had a mentor in LA whom I had met who was really, huge, a huge sort of transformative experience in my life. I still had, I'll tell you what, even though I was leaving from Yale, I still was struggling a little bit with sort of socialism, Marxism, in the sense of I just hadn't been totally convinced to leave it behind. And at least like all of it, I'd done it for so long. And this mentor, he just, I have to say, he obliterated me. I mean, he was just so sharp, so well known. He was Romanian. He is Romanian, political philosophy background, etc. And just he really did help me to grow philosophically and get away from some of that stuff. And it really opened my eyes, like, once again, to seeing things in a way I hadn't before, seeing the problems with this worldview, the metaphysical problems, in ways that most people are pretty careless about. Like, most people will tell you something like, well, it just doesn't work in practice. Well, that's not going to convince anybody, frankly. It's not going to convince the sort of dyed-in-the-wool socialist. So at any rate, I'll just say he was the one who said, look, if I were to go anywhere in Los Angeles, he was Roman Catholic, he was Orthodox, but he knew we were interested in becoming Orthodox. I said I would go to Holy Virgin Mary. And I was like, okay, if he said it. And we went and we just fell in love. And it became home very quickly.
That's amazing. How long was it before you started thinking about the priesthood?
It's so funny. I had I'll never forget sitting down with the priest, and we were moving towards reception. And he didn't ask me this before, but like, he finally says, do you want to be a priest? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, good answer. And I had just gone, the Yale burnout was huge. It was humongous. And to ride that wave of going somewhere, and you're sort of discerning priesthood. And then, by the way, like, Episcopal priests and Orthodox priests are like worlds away from each other. Like, I had, as an Episcopal priest, you're not doing services all the time. I saw what my priest was doing, the confessions and the services, like, ooh, that's intense. It's a different sort of life. So I was just done, and I was loving teaching and just loved teaching so much. So I just said no. And so that was that. And then it was actually, even though I loved teaching, it was my wife of all people who one day just sort of sat me down and said, look, like, you should think about this. And because she had met me when I was thinking about it more seriously, and just said, I think there's something that you should reconsider, and that you've lost since you left that. And so I think you should go talk to the priest and talk through it. And that's a long conversation to itself, because kind of enjoying what we're doing at Pacifica and everything else. So that started the conversation of priesthood, and that was a couple years after being received. And so then we started the conversation.
Wow. So when you eventually decided you wanted to do it, did you have to go back to seminary to get the MDiv, or was it just a few classes in addition to what you had? Or
Yeah,
how did that work?
that was the other thing that was
Right? You got the
really
wrong degree.
crazy.
Shoot.
Yeah, and I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to be in Los Angeles forever, but I really love Pacifica. I mean, I'm still part of Pacifica. And so the idea of getting up to go back to school just, you know, even no, you're just like, no way. And then not to mention thinking about taking on more debt or something like this.
Yeah.
But there were some conversations along the way as to like various options, but eventually seminary became the thing that was like, we should probably go do this. And some of it really was that, we still hadn't been Orthodox very long. So it was like, well, at the very least, we need to go to seminary and do the 3 years and like be at a place of discernment,
Yeah.
instead of taking some other roundabout way and doing this, you could do like the DVP or something, and that works for some people, but I don't think that's where we were at. And so it just sort of crystallized, it was the right thing to do, even though it was not the fun thing to do.
Right. Not the easy thing for sure.
Yeah, not the easy thing to do. So, and then
that makes sense, right? You're going to live in an Orthodox community. You're going to really soak it up a little bit for a few years, which I think is a good idea before one decides to be an Orthodox priest,
Totally. And to be in the services, like, yeah. Like LA, you can't, we were like an hour from church. So we went to as many services as we could, but, to really stew in the services, I think makes a huge difference. And so even sorry?
I'm sorry, was it St. Tikhon's or where'd you go? St. Vlad's?
St. Vladimir's. Nice. Yeah, it crystallized right around the time of COVID. So yeah, and even to this day, like when I was there, I served. I had just the joy and the honor of serving as sacristan, in the sense of, I don't know how I fell into that, frankly. But that was like, just getting to do that was like, you really were just stewing in the services all the time. I mean, it was really, and then getting to learn from other people while doing that. I mean, it's just a phenomenal experience. So yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. If you had known how great it was going to be, you probably would have been a little more eager to move across the country and pick it all up. But we don't know until we get there, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, it's still hard. So, I mean, I would say seminary is still, I had a priest, I'll name drop this one, Father Gabriel. He's in Fenton, Michigan, who I was another parish I was connected to and am connected to during my discernment process, where my family eventually converted to Orthodoxy there. And so it became almost like a second home to us. And, he was also very instrumental in just sort of, and just being a pastor to us, in a lot of ways. And at any rate, I remember going to seminary, getting ready to go to seminary, and even talking to him a little bit about it. And he just said, be prepared. He said, things are going to happen, like the sort of spiritual warfare. It's going to surprise you. Like, you don't even know what it's going to look like. But it's coming. And it's going to test you in ways that you can't foresee. And at the time, of course, I think, yeah, okay, like I trust me, Yale was no walk in the park. But I thought, okay, that's fine and dandy. But and lo and behold, the man is a man of insight. And it was more challenging in some ways than Yale, because different things are going on. I think Yale's challenging maybe at a worldview level, but preparing for priesthood, it carries a certain existential character to it that I don't think Yale did.
That makes sense to me, for sure. But so you're at St. Vlad's for 3 years. So when did you guys finish? Was it just last year? When did you finish?
Yeah, we're fresh. So we finished in, it's funny, I'm really bad with dates. 2023. I think that's it.
Wow.
Is that right?
It must be,
I
because
think
if
so.
you went in 2020, then that's when it would be.
Yeah.
So were you ordained right after you got out? I mean, you're already married, so you've got that going for you. So you just
right. I'm one of the few luckies. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The seminary tends to do something like you're ordained a deacon at some point in your second year, and then you're ordained a priest sometime in your third year, so that you can get the experience. So I was ordained November 6th. of my third year in 2022.
Wow.
And I guess that's why the dating feels weird to me, because I've been a priest since 2022. I was still in seminary, and then we graduated in May. And so I got to, serve at a church up there in New York, as a young priest, and got to serve at the seminary, and yeah, it was glorious.
That's neat. And Greenville, South Carolina is your first real parish that you've been
so that's where
permanently,
where everything is kind of coalesced to come here. And when we were told about Greenville, told / asked, it's a mixed bag, but we'll say asked, if it was more an ask, that would you want to come here? And we were both just like, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. So I actually had the privilege of doing a summer internship at the church I'm at as a deacon.
Oh, nice.
So that's kind of where some of that connection happened, and the fit was just, it felt right. And so, yeah, we knew like in January of our last year that we were going to be placed in Greenville.
Oh, that's great. That's really nice. So Greenville, what's the parish like? St. John of the Ladder?
St. John of the Ladder. Yeah, the only St. John of the Ladder that I'm aware of in North America.
I bet. I don't feel like I've ever seen that before. That's neat. That's really cool. How big is the parish, and what's it like there?
The thing is, it's huge in the sense, I mean, I don't know what huge means to most people, but it's grown so much even the time I've been here. So today we had 357 people in church. And so on an average Sunday, we're something like that. We're somewhere in the 350s or higher. A light Sunday would be about 300. And so, I mean, for perspective, like just a couple of years ago, we were like 240. So we're reaching capacity. I would want to say pretty quickly. We're at capacity. And so it's a large parish in that sense, but it's also new. The temple was recently constructed in 2018. It's a beautiful temple, designed by Andrew Gould. We have beautiful iconography. We have an iconographer named Seraphim O'Keefe he's an iconographer in residence. So he's with us for like 10 years painting the interior of the temple. And so everything is just really amazing. We have a beautiful community, very obviously convert heavy, but we have people from all over the place. I mean, probably the biggest demographic, non-convert as it were, would be our Slavic community of Russians, Ukrainians. But definitely, most of our converts are mainline Protestant, evangelical, some Pentecostal, nuns, duns, etc. So it's just a really thriving community, and we have a lot of prayers that God is going to keep planting churches in Greenville, South Carolina. So it's kind of our hope for the future, is to plant more churches. We need to at this point. I mean, we just don't have room for people. So may God bless the growth and give us the means of building more temples.
Thank God. It's amazing. It is really neat. I think in the South in particular, we're just seeing so much growth and so much interest in Orthodoxy, and it's so beautiful. And
yes,
I don't know that it's really true all over the country. I think some places it is, in some places, but down here, I feel like it's really kind of out of control. Our parish too. Yeah. It's like a couple of years ago, we had a good number of people, and now it's twice as big, and it's too many. And we were busy building a hall, and now we've outgrown the hall. It's not even finished yet. So it's like,
where are you at? Actually,
I'm in Austin, Texas.
Okay, very good.
But similar, but I think throughout the South, right? Like there's just a lot of interest in Orthodoxy. Why do you think that is? The converts that you meet and that you encounter there in Greenville, what do you see in common for them? What brings them?
I think it's a kindred spirit moment in many ways, where certainly different people have slightly different ends and different reasons. People talk about truth, beauty, goodness, and sometimes we emphasize beauty, as we should, but people come for all kinds of reasons. And I do think if I had to put a pin on it, it really is my own experience. I think that the fallout of Christianity elsewhere in the Protestant and Roman Catholic world, of course, especially mainline Protestantism, is so immense and immeasurable that you have people who love the Lord, they love Christ, they've been Christians, they're serious Christians, but they're suddenly just faced with a kind of cognitive dissonance that can no longer be abided by. And whatever that looks like, it looks different for everybody. It's not always, say, political, and you certainly see that, but it's many things. And then just the internet and the exposure to orthodoxy that's happened on the internet suddenly begins to creep in a new way to say there is alternatives. And so what I hear probably from most people is some mixture of the disillusionment with where they were at, but hungry for something of substance. Some kind of general exposure to orthodoxy online from some facet of the internet, and then the experience of the Orthodox Church, the beauty of its liturgy, the depth of its theology, particularly its ascetic practice, its spiritual life, and it all just crystallizes in a way where there's very few people, frankly, who walk into our doors that walk back out. So at least our experience is, there's always attrition. But, let's say if we have 60, 70, 80 inquirers, we can expect to receive 40, 50, 60 of them. So it's pretty phenomenal. But I think it's some mixture of those things. I mean, of course, I think one could analyze it to know, and as people are doing all over the place, but at the core, that's it. At least our experience at St. John the Latter, that's what's going on.
Well, I do think, you can't really distill things down to one reason, right? Like no one has one reason, but I do think you're right that I think it's a lot of people who really do love the Lord and are genuinely reverent Christians, and they're looking for something that sort of matches their experience and their hope for what Christianity can be or should be. So thank God for that. And may we live up to it, because that's a lot.
That's the challenge
coming in for us to try to do a really good job of this. So that is a big challenge.
It is definitely on our conscience, our shoulders. I mean, I think people, and a lot of people are talking about this too. We talk a lot about growth in the Orthodox Church. I don't think we have any clue what that means and what that looks like, in the sense of, I was talking to a good friend of mine who we were having a conversation, a few of us. And he just did the numbers very briefly, just to put in perspective. Just in our area in South Carolina, if we were to secure 1% of evangelicals in South Carolina, that's not including mainlines, Roman Catholics, whatever, just evangelicals, 1%, we would have 18,000 converts just in South Carolina. Now, our question is, where are you going to put them? Where are the churches? Where are the priests? How are you going to pay them? There's a lot of really, everyone loves to, even in Orthodoxy, talk about, the spicy stuff. And of course we do, but there is a little bit of a numbers problem here. And, I saw something online the other day, you probably saw this too, was going around, that was like 6 million Orthodox in the United States. Like this is mathematically impossible. In the sense of, there might be 6 million Orthodox in the United States if we're counting barely whatever, it's like my fifth grandma removed was Orthodox. But no, it's a real challenge. And to your point, may God have mercy on us and give us the strength and the wisdom and the prudence to discern what this looks like, because I think we're really just not ready for growth. Just at a sheer mathematical level, and so it's going to take a lot of hands to make it. But the harvest is ripe.
There you go. It's a neat time. It's really a neat time. Well, Father, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight. It's been a joy to get a chance to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm humbled by the invitation. It's been a blessing.
It's been great. Thank you, Father, and thank you to our audience for joining us. And come back next Sunday night. We'll meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian. Good night, guys.